Oh dear, an error occurred, of course. Here we go. All right, we are live. Well, friends, this is the start of True Health Tuesdays, and we have a good one for you this evening. Supplemental vitamin D over sunlight. A calorie is a calorie. A fever should be treated. Are these popular health positions true or false? Hi, friends. My name is Charles Reynolds with the Living Manna SDA Church. And on today's True Health Tuesdays, we'll examine these and other popular health positions so that you can avoid common myths. Our instructor for this evening's journey is Dr. Roger Swelt. And it would seem appropriate to start an introduction of Roger Swelt with the fact that he is a quadruple board certified medical doctor, as that sounds so impressive. However, what is more relevant to the present company, and perhaps even more impressive, is his long standing and tireless dedication to proper education and his ability to clarify complex concepts. You see, in college, Dr. Swelt was a chemistry and physics tutor. And later, he helped prospective and existing medical students prepare for their entrance exams and their licensing exams. Now, he often lectures across the country at conferences and for medical societies. Dr. Swelt is a critical care physician, a pulmonologist, and sleep physician in California. And over 1 million clinicians use his website, medcram.com, for clear and concise explanations. Well, we'll have a brief Q&A at the end of Dr. Swelt's presentation. And I want you to leave your questions in the chat box or in the comments below, as I'll be taking a look at those questions, filtering them over to Dr. Swelt after his presentation. And we'll take about a brief bit of time to go through those questions and allow him some time to answer them. So be sure to put your questions in. But with that being said, I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Roger Swelt, who will now share his passion for demystifying medical health concepts with you. Dr. Swelt.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's really good to be with you today. We are live. I'm out here on the West Coast. It's about 3:30 on a Tuesday, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what we ought to be doing with our health. And what I did is I put together the top 8 health myths for our very first True Health Tuesdays, our THTs, as we like to call them. And I think it's a good way to sort of get the ball rolling, because what True Health Tuesdays are going to turn into is a great way to learn about your body and why things are the way they are. And if we can start to sort of highlight some of these myths, we can also start to lay the groundwork for good health. A lot of people think that, you are what you eat, and that's true, but there's a lot more to your car than just putting in the right gasoline. You've got to make sure that you change the oil. You got to make sure that you rotate the tires. You've got to check the fluids and those sorts of things. So there's a lot more to your body than just eating the right stuff. You also got to take care of it in so many other ways. So let's start with those myths. Let's go to the first myth. If we could start with the slideshow here too. The very first myth is, if you supplement with vitamin D, you don't need to get sunlight. I've heard this one a lot. People say, you know what? I don't need to go outside. I'm taking my vitamin D. I'm getting the benefits of the sun. As if you could take all of the benefits of the sun and put it into a capsule. I think that's really not the right thing to think about there. Let's put it this way. The sun does give you vitamin D. There's no question about it. But there's so many other benefits from the sun other than just vitamin D in your body. Certainly, you can get vitamin D in supplements and certain foods, but there are so many other benefits to the sun, and we'll talk about those right now. It's a complex situation. How does your body make vitamin D? As you can see here, there's a lot of arrows and letters and names that we can't pronounce. But basically what happens is between the hours of 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun is very high in the sky, ultraviolet B radiation can come through the atmosphere, goes into your skin, deep into the dermis of your skin, and it causes a reaction to occur that creates vitamin D from cholesterol. Vitamin D then goes to your liver where it gets processed, and then finally onto your kidneys where it gets processed in its final form. And so really you do need to have the sun to be able to create vitamin D, or you need to be able to ingest it. But there's a lot more to it than just vitamin D. And what I wanted to talk about is how quickly, just briefly here, how light interacts with our bodies. There's two ways that light interacts with our bodies. The first way is through the eyes, the vision. The light hits the back of our retina and it goes back to our brain, and we'll talk about that. But there's another way that light affects us, and it affects us even when it doesn't go through into our eyes. It actually penetrates deep down into our skin, and it affects us through the mitochondria. You're like, what is the mitochondria? It's the powerhouse of all of the cells of your body, except for just a few. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's just briefly talk about how light interacts with our body way beyond just vitamin D. So as I was telling you, light does go through your eye and it hits the back of the retina. And there's two major places that it goes in your body. Number one, it goes obviously to the occipital lobe, and that's where you see. It's at the very back of your brain. But there's two other places in the body that light is very important to. And we know this from anatomy because we can see those nerves going to these portions of the brain. The first one is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is your master clock of your human body. This tells your body when it's time to sleep, when it's time to eat, the best times of all the way down from coordination to when your insulin levels are the most sensitive. And this is all regulated by your circadian rhythm. You know, I had a friend that used to work at Disneyland, and he went in at nighttime. You think that's an odd time to go in? Well, that's when they were doing all of the work behind the scenes, changing the cash registers, mopping the floors, doing inspection on the rides. All of these things were happening at night so that the park could be open during the day for customers. This is similar to what's actually going on in your body. It's not like your body is shut down at night. There's just processes that are occurring that are going on behind the scenes. All of those things are regulated by your circadian rhythm, which is governed in your suprachiasmatic nucleus in your brain. Well, what regulates that? It's light coming at the right time of day. The right time of day is in the morning, and the wrong time of day would be light coming in at night, because that's going to manipulate and shut down melatonin production at night. So that's how light affects us in terms of the suprachiasmatic nucleus. As you can see, though, on the slide, there is another pathway, a pathway that is in blue that goes down there into the perihabenular nucleus, a completely different portion of the brain. This portion of the brain is involved with mood. So mood is how you feel. You know, there's a lot of people who live in areas where there's not a lot of sunlight, and they're at risk for getting something called SAD, SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. And getting light into the eyes can be very beneficial. The light that you get in your eyes is very, very beneficial, and it goes well beyond just taking a vitamin D capsule. You know, those of you who are familiar with photography will know that if you go inside of a building or indoors and you set your aperture and your f-stop and all those settings on your manual camera for inside, you know that you have to open up the aperture, which is the amount for light to come through. If you were to take that camera and then go outside, it would just be a big white screen. And that's because the amount of light that you get outdoors is many, many, many times more than the light that you get indoors. It seems like it's not a big difference because of our eyes. When we are inside, our pupils constrict and our pupils dilate to let in as much light as possible. And when we go outside, they constrict. And so we really don't get a sense about how much more light there is outside than inside. To give you an example, on a bright sunny day, you can get something called 100,000 lux. That's the intensity of light outside. Inside, it's about 50 to 100. So it's literally 1,000 times more light outside than there is inside. And so that's why it's really important, especially as humans living in the United States, where we spend 93% of our lives inside, to get outside to get the benefits of that light. Let's talk a little bit about, though, the light, not just that goes through the eye, but the light that hits your skin. So as you can see here, there is there's something called the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Okay. And so just like an engine in a car, which is responsible for turning the wheels, and there's a problem, of course, when that engine gets too hot, it can cause a lot of heat. And that's a problem, because if that heat is allowed to accumulate and get more, it can actually shut the engine down. Well, that's the same thing that happens in the mitochondria. The mitochondria creates energy for the cell, but in the process of creating energy for the cell, it makes something called hydroxy radicals or oxidative stress. And if the body doesn't deal with that oxidative stress, those mitochondria can actually shut down just like an engine would without a water pump or oil. Well, science has actually connected oxidative stress, this bad stuff that happens in the mitochondria, with the diseases there you see on the screen: less optimal health, inflammation, cancer, dementia, diabetes, even learning disabilities like autism. These things have been related to dysfunctional mitochondria. Now, this dysfunctional mitochondria, again, is occurring because these byproducts of what it does build up and actually destroy it. So what are some of the things that the body can do to neutralize this oxidative stress? Well, as you can see here on the screen, there are two systems in place. One system that happens at night, and another system on the right that happens during the day. At night, when you are sleeping, when there's less light, the melatonin production in the pineal gland in the brain starts to go up. Now, this only happens if there's no light hitting the eyes. So you have to make sure that at night there's low levels of light. Then you'll get melatonin. This melatonin then comes down, goes into the mitochondria, and it takes care of the oxidative stress. This is why it's really important to make sure that when the sun goes down, the amount of light hitting your eye also goes down. After 9 o'clock, the amount of light hitting your eye should go down so that you get the maximal benefits of getting melatonin. However, during the day, obviously there's plenty of light. And this is where it's really interesting, because that light that's coming from the sun, specifically in the near infrared spectrum, can penetrate deep down into your skin and actually stimulate your mitochondria to make its own melatonin right there on the spot. And so it's really important, as you can see, that if you want to minimize the damage to your mitochondria, that depending on whether it's day or night, you have something very specific to do. At night, you need to make sure that it's dark and that you're going to bed at a reasonable time. Then you will get your mitochondria well protected. During the day, it's also important to get outside and to get that near infrared radiation. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So things have been put in place. So is it true then to say that if you're taking vitamin D, you don't need to go out into the sun? I would say that's a myth. And I think we've just disproved that. We've got 8 myths to go through. So let's go to the second myth. Number 2, taking a supplement of melatonin will give you the full benefits of melatonin. Well, actually, that is a myth. And one of the problems with buying over-the-counter melatonin is that it's not regulated by the FDA. And so nobody's checking to see if the manufacturers are putting that substance melatonin into the capsules. You could be taking chalk for all we know. There are some third-party testing laboratories that will actually make sure that there's melatonin, but not all of those entities actually put in melatonin. But let's just say you could get melatonin. The problem is that melatonin is not only an antioxidant. In fact, it's actually turns out to be the most powerful antioxidant in the human body, even more powerful than vitamin E or even glutathione. It's a signal, in addition to that, it's a signal to the body that it's time to go to sleep. And so if you're taking melatonin supplements, you're really telling your body, and maybe even incorrectly, that it's now time to go to sleep. The problem with that is that you can't take it all the time. Well, then you say, Dr. Schwell, what about if we take melatonin at night? And some people actually do take melatonin. And I've actually prescribed and told patients to take melatonin at night. But here's the key. The key is that the more melatonin you take at night as a supplement, the less likely it is to work. The types of doses that we're talking about where melatonin helps you fall asleep and gives you a good night's sleep, it's very, very small. We're talking 1 to 3 milligrams. And that's not usually enough to do the type of work that you need to have melatonin do at night in your mitochondria. I would say the best thing to do is to make sure that you're not exposing your eyes to bright light at night. And we have a big problem in our society with that. What happens at night? We get home from a long day's work, the television goes on, the iPhone comes out, the smartphone comes out, the computer comes on, all these sorts of things that we do. All of these things have a unsavory side effect of shutting down melatonin production, which is very important. And that's what this is showing you here, is how the master clock is set is through light to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. But also realize that any amount of light coming into the eye is going to shut down melatonin production in the pineal gland. So I would say best way to get melatonin is to make sure that your eyes are not being exposed to bright light at night or light in general, and to make sure that you're getting plenty of sun exposure. You don't even have to be directly exposed to the sun to get the kind of light that I'm talking about. Near infrared light can penetrate through clothes and does a very good job of that. So you don't have to go with short sleeves. You can wear long sleeve and still get the benefits of near infrared radiation. So what we're showing here is that melatonin, as we've talked about, builds sleep pressure throughout the day. Bright light suppresses it. And again, the typical dose, if you're going to take it at night, is about 1 to 3 milligrams. When it starts to get more than that, it actually has negative side effects. Here's an interesting study that they did in terms of light at night. I sometimes read at night. And what's happened recently is people like to read their books or even e-readers. Obviously, e-readers are computer books that are backlit. And what this study showed, which was really interesting, is looking at the illumination coming from an e-book reader, which is this graph here, and a print book, which you can barely see, but these little bumps here along the bottom are the graph for the print book. So what do you notice? There's a lot more light coming from the e-reader than from the print book being illuminated by a very soft and dim light. What would I say? I'd say that, well, based on what we've just said, it would be much better to put that e-reader down at night and instead read a good old-fashioned print book. And I'll tell you the reason why. It's because when they looked at the studies, they tried to determine between those two subjects that we just showed you, which one got to sleep faster. Well, because there was more light coming into the eyes of that person reading the e-reader, their melatonin production was suppressed, and they took a longer time, statistically significantly, to go to sleep. And so that's one of the side effects of exposing your eyes to light at night is insomnia. And that's a big problem, especially now in the United States. Another reason why insomnia is a problem is because exposing your eyes to light at night delays the circadian rhythm. So remember, we said the circadian rhythm is what governs when things happen. And if your circadian rhythm used to tell you that you're supposed to get tired at 10 o'clock at night and you're exposing your eyes to bright light, you're going to start to feel like you're sleepy at 12 o'clock at night. And then if you want to go to bed at 10 o'clock, you're not going to be able to do that. That's insomnia. The other flip side of that is that instead of waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, your body is going to naturally want to wake up later as well, at 8 o'clock in the morning. And what are the consequences of that? Well, we have a whole industry in the United States called Starbucks that is supposed to take care of that. And we wonder why the lineup is so long for a cup of coffee in the morning. Okay, so my recommendation is don't depend on supplementation from vitamin D or melatonin. There's a lot better ways, more holistic ways to get the type of hormone balance that you need in life. All right, let's go on to myth number 3. I get plenty of sunshine at work because I'm standing by the window, or I'm sitting by the window, or I have a 2-window office. Well, that may be the case. I won't say that that's a myth, but one thing I want you to know is that because of changes that have happened in construction in the last 20 years, there's a big difference between an office 30 years ago and an office today. And I'll tell you the reason why. Number one is because of the lights that we use in offices and also the windows that we use in offices. Now, before I told you, I said that near infrared radiation from the sun, which is a huge amount of energy from the sun, can penetrate deep into your skin and cause that melatonin production. As it turns out, we used to get a significant amount of near infrared radiation from incandescent light bulbs. Take a look here, and you'll see this line here in blue is the spectrum of light that you get from an incandescent light bulb. And what I'm trying to show you here is that this white column here is the visible spectrum, but there's energy that comes out of a bulb that we cannot see that is lower in wavelength than the visible spectrum, and that's represented by this red area that takes up most of the graph. Notice that there's a large amount of that blue graph that's in that section. That's telling you that an incandescent light bulb gives off a lot of near-infrared radiation. Now, let's talk a little bit about near-infrared radiation. It feels like heat. That's how we interact with that type of light. Let me give you an example. On a warm summer day, you can close your eyes and you can turn your back to the sun, and you'll feel the sun coming through your shirt and warming your skin. That's near-infrared radiation that you're feeling. It's that type of radiation, that type of energy from the sun that is responsible for causing that type of reaction. There's a lot of studies that have come out, and the hypothesis is that near-infrared radiation stimulates the production of melatonin production in the mitochondria, okay? And we were actually getting that from incandescent bulbs. You know this, right? When you turn on an incandescent bulb, it's only a matter of time before that bulb heats up so hot that you can't even touch it. Tremendous amount of energy. Now let's look at LED bulbs. Here they are in red. Almost all of the energy that is produced by these bulbs are in the visible spectrum. There is no near-infrared energy coming at all from LED lights. And we know that LED lights use less energy, and they're starting to use those more and more now in buildings because they cost less to operate. And so we're actually, as human beings, getting less and less near-infrared radiation when we're inside. Well, what about the windows? That was the original myth that we talked about here. As you can see here, this red box is looking at the near-infrared spectrum of light coming through different types of windows. Here we see here at the top a clear window that you might see in a building prior to 1970. It almost completely transmits all of the near-infrared radiation without a problem. And you would know that this would be because if you stood by the window and the sun was shining through the window, you would feel that warmth, that heat coming through. But the problem is that causes increased energy costs because the sun coming through that window is heating up that office. And that means you're going to have to use more energy, more electricity to cool that office down. And so a lot of research went into making windows that don't allow near-infrared radiation to penetrate through. And that makes sense from an energy consumption standpoint, but it doesn't make sense if we're trying to get near-infrared radiation exposure. And so you can see here that there's high grade, moderate grade, and low grade, something called low E glass. You can tell that that's what it is because if the sun is shining through that window and you don't feel warmth, it's because that glass is preventing near-infrared radiation from coming through. You won't see the difference because it's out of that visible spectrum, but you won't feel it. This is important because Americans spend only about 7% of their waking hours outside. I mean, we literally go from the house to the car, from the car to the job, from the job back to the car, and from the car back inside the house. And we can go and do that for days and days and days on end. That means that we're literally getting almost no near-infrared radiation from the sun. That could be a real problem. So to say that you go to work and you get plenty of sunlight through the glass, you may be right. Depending on how old that glass is, you may be wrong. All right, let's go on to a completely different myth. Here's another myth. It makes no difference when I eat. A calorie is just a calorie. And again, this goes back to the topic that we were discussing before, which is circadian rhythm. So the circadian rhythm governs just about everything in our body. Do you know that there's a time of the day where your coordination is the best? It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when your coordination is the best. I'm a pulmonologist. I can get people into my office to do a breathing test, and they will have different values at different times of the day, slightly, but very well reproducible. And it's because your body is on a circadian rhythm. There is a time and a place for all of these things that happen in your body. And as it turns out, insulin sensitivity is highest in the beginning of the day and lower in the end of the day. What does that mean? That means that if you were to eat a calorie at the beginning of the day, the insulin levels would not need to go up as high to take care of that calorie than they would towards the end of the day. And so it would be better, if that is the case, and we've shown this, is that if you can concentrate the intake of your meal towards the beginning of the day, in other words, eating a larger breakfast, maybe a good size lunch, and really kind of minimizing dinner as much as possible, and maybe making it early in the day as possible, what you'll find is that you need to secrete overall less insulin, and that can have tremendous impact in terms of your metabolic health and also in diabetes. So this was a study that was published, diurnal pattern to insulin secretion and insulin action in healthy individuals. And what they showed here was that insulin sensitivity tended to be higher at breakfast than at lunch or dinner. So that would mean that it would be advantageous for you if you had a specific amount of calories to concentrate those calories as much as possible if you have a normal circadian rhythm to breakfast rather than to dinner. Now, if you look at the American culture and society, we place a high value on entertainment. We place a high value on work. And so coming home, being with the family, sitting down to a big dinner and turning on the television, you can see already what's happened, right? We've now insulin has to work harder. It has to be secreted at a higher level. And we're exposing our eyes to a lot of light, which shuts down melatonin production. Here was a great study. This is an amazing study that was done in China looking at just what I'm just talking about. So what they did was if you can notice here, actually, no, this was not in China. This was another study. This was 11 overweight adults, randomized crossover study. So in other words, everybody was their own control. It's very powerful when you do a study where everybody was their own control. You get very powerful results. Notice what they did. They had the same number of calories, but the control group was breakfast at 8, lunch at 2 in the afternoon, and dinner at 8 o'clock at night. Does that sound familiar? Like, how many of us are doing that, right? As opposed to the same breakfast at 8, the same lunch, not at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but at 11 o'clock in the morning, and dinner at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay? So in other words, we're taking the amount of time that we're feeding people over and we're squishing it and we're front loading it at the beginning of the day where you have the most amount of insulin sensitivity. What did they find? Oh, by the way, they took a bunch of blood samples and they wanted to see what happened. So here's what they found. First of all, here's something called circadian clock genes. What they noticed is that when they did this, the meals that they ate actually affected the genes in their brain on how their circadian rhythm was actually carried out. In other words, how you eat actually can change the way that your circadian rhythm. That's basically the summary of this graph. But notice what else they found out. So we're looking here at the graphs along the right. They found that there was improved secretion of something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So what does brain-derived neurotrophic factor do, right? It's this funny named thing. It's a gene that makes these proteins. They found that this gene was higher in the people that concentrated their food towards the beginning of the day. And this protein promotes the survival of nerve cells by playing a role in the growth, maturation, differentiation, and maintenance of these neurons in the brain. Okay, can you think about dementia? Can you think about these degenerative diseases? Well, here's a gene that promotes the growth and the stability of those neurons, and it's higher in people that concentrate their meals towards the beginning of the day. Another one is called sirtuin-1. This is an enzyme that promotes insulin secretion and action, upregulates fat metabolism. Who here wants to upregulate fat metabolism? Sign me up. I love to upregulate my fat metabolism. It protects against inflammation. I'd love to have anti-inflammatories in my body. I don't have time for inflammation. Oxidative stress, that was exactly what we were talking about around the mitochondria. And DNA damage. I don't want DNA damage. DNA damage means cancer. Okay? So this sirtuin-1 is one of those things that does that. And if you'll notice that sirtuin-1s were actually higher. And this basically says it extends lifespan. Here's another thing that was higher. LC3A encodes essential structural components of autophagosomal membranes. Let me tell you something a little bit here. Okay? I want you to, this is really important. When you're talking about, let's talk about a city. A city has a lot of processes that are occurring in it. During the day, people are going back and forth. But what happens? People are building during the day. They're building buildings. They're building roads. They're doing all this stuff. That at night, that's when you get the repair people out. If they've got to resurface the freeway, do they do that during the day or do they do it at night? They do it at night. If you've got to repair things, you do it at night. You do it when it's not being used. This is exactly what happens in the human body. What happens in the human body when you're not eating, when you're fasting, is things get broken down. Old things get broken down and then they get rebuilt. So it's not just weight that we're after here. It's not just how much do you weigh. It's what's the quality of the structure that you have. You could weigh, whatever it is, but if the quality of the structure is poor, then what your body needs to be doing is breaking things down and then rebuilding it back new again. Then you'll have better quality. You'll feel better. Your enzymes will work better. Everything will be better. Here's the key I want you to understand is that process of breaking down only happens when you're fasting. Let me say that again. That's really important to understand. That process of breaking things down, it's called autophagosomy. So basically, it's self-eating, literally. That's what the Latin means. It's self-eating. Your body is breaking bad stuff down so that you can build it back again. That can only happen when you're not eating. So if you are eating late into the night and then you go to bed, that period of time when you're sleeping, that fasting period is shorter. If it's shorter, you're not going to get as much breakdown. If you're eating your meals earlier in the day, that allows more time for fasting, more time for breaking down, more time for making sure that bad things are gotten rid of, and you can build back better the next day. Okay, so fasting is really, really an amazing area of topic. I could tell you about a ton of studies that have been done looking at fasting. They do it down at University of California, at USC as well, to their chemotherapeutic patients. When they give them chemotherapy, what do they normally see in their cancer patients? 2 weeks later, their white blood cells drop and their immune system takes a hit. Okay, that's a bad side effect of chemotherapy. Now what they've noticed is that when they have them fast for 3 days prior to that, they can give them that chemotherapy and their immune system doesn't break down. It stays the same. In fact, they've noticed such a tremendous change that that's their protocol now when they give chemotherapy, is they have them fast prior to that chemotherapy because it completely rebuilds their immune system. And so this is really an amazing thing. So the myth to say is all you got to do is add up calories and then make sure you're eating those calories, and it doesn't matter when you're eating those calories. It's a myth. It really does matter when you're having those calories. All right. Let's keep going here because we got a lot of myths to cover. A fever should be treated. Oh, I tell you, when I was a medical resident, that was it. If your patient had a fever, everybody was trained to come to you and ask you, okay, we have a fever. How much Tylenol do you want to give? Why? Because Tylenol brings down the fever. We're all afraid of the fever. Let me tell you, there's two parts to your immune system. There's the innate immune system and there is the adaptive immune system. The innate immune system, what you see there on the left, is what is responsible for taking care of infections immediately. As soon as they enter the body, this is what takes care of the infection. And one of the ways that it happens is through the body increasing your body temperature. So a fever of 101, 102, even up to 103, all of this to do is to make sure that your body's immune system is signaled into getting rid of that infection, whether it's a virus or a bacteria. And one of the major products of the innate immune system is something you see there on the slide called IFN. That stands for interferon. Interferon is a great name for an enzyme because it literally interferes with the viral reproduction. You want to shut down that virus with interferon. Now, as it turns out, interferon is the same substance that kind of makes you feel like you got the flu. So if I were to inject somebody with interferon, they would feel a little nauseous. They would have some chills, some body aches. So when you know that you have chills and body aches and fever, you know that your body has interferon. That's a good thing to have. Okay, so you're knowing that is good. So why would we want to have a fever? This is really interesting. This is a study that was done a long time ago. What they did was they had subjects at different temperatures, and they took lymphocytes out of those people at different temperatures. Okay. And what they did was they stimulated them as if there was an infection. I want to show you this next slide. This is really an amazing slide. As you can see down here, we had core body temperature here starting out at a normal temperature and then finally going up to about 39 degrees, which is a fever. That's about 39 is about 102. And what happened once it reached 39 degrees? Once you reach the fever, there was a 10-fold increase in the amount of interferon at that temperature. That's an amazing increase, folks. And so, as it turns out, a fever is the body's cry for help. It's the way that the body actually is doing what it needs to do. So the last thing we would want to do is somebody who has an infection is to disarm them by getting rid of their fever. Now, I'll qualify that by saying, yes, it is possible for people to have fevers that are like 104, 105. That's when those fevers are actually causing more harm than good. But that's a minority of the fevers that we see. Sometimes people in the intensive care unit can have a really high fever and their heart rate goes fast. And we try to make sure that those things are taken care of. But 90%, 95% of the fevers that we see in people who are sick is something that the body is doing naturally to get rid of those infections. So I would hate to say that we'd want to treat a fever, especially in those situations. Here was a really interesting study that looked at this. And this kind of goes back to COVID-19. What they found was that they looked at patients with COVID-19 that had very severe infections and those that had mild infections. And what they found was something really interesting. In people that had mild symptoms of COVID-19, they had the highest amount of interferon in the group compared to those that had the most severe and even the most critical infections. Those had the lowest interferon. So here's a hypothesis. If we could get people to have better interferon responses, maybe, just maybe, they would have more mild COVID-19 symptoms. And you know what? That's exactly what scientists are actually working on. In fact, I'll tell you this. In fact, we know for a fact that SARS-CoV-2 actually has proteins in them so that when they infect the human body, those proteins in the virus actually suppress the body's ability to make a fever, suppress the body's ability to make interferon. So it would behoove us that if we knew somebody who had a COVID-19 infection or somebody yourself got a COVID-19 infection, what I would do and what I have done and what I've recommended to others is to stimulate ourselves to make as much interferon early on as much as possible to limit the replication of the virus. And that is not specific just for COVID-19, folks. That's for anything. So if it's the flu, if it's a cold, if it's a rhinovirus, COVID, it doesn't matter. We want to have good innate immune responses. And so one of the ways that we can actually do that is with hot cold therapy showers. Now, there has been some actual research, and I'd love to get into this a little bit more. But what they have found, as we just showed, is that when you heat up the body, it causes an innate immune response that's very good. But when you use cold right at the end, there is an increase in natural killer cells and lymphocytes. And so what I would do, and what I've told other people to do, is when they're coming down with something, you don't even need to get a test to know this. You can get a test, of course, but you don't need to just start this right away, is to do this hot type of shower where it's hot. You do this for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then right at the end, just switch that dial right over and take the coldest shower that you can tolerate. If you've got heart disease, if you can't really take the kind of shock that might happen, then maybe not do it so cold. Maybe do it a little bit lukewarm, but try to go down as cold as you can. Do it for about a minute, and you'll notice that your immune system actually gets revved up. There's good science behind this. So I think it would be a myth to say that we want to treat a fever. Okay, let's go on to our next myth. Cold temperatures can cause viral infections. Now, I'll tell you, most of what my mother and grandmother told me has turned out to be correct. But how many of you have heard, hey, don't go out in the cold, you're going to catch a cold, right? In fact, maybe that's even the reason why they call it a cold. Well, there is an interesting study that was done at the University of Toronto Interestingly, actually, it was done in Canada, but it was sponsored by the US military. And they wanted to test to see what would be the effects of cold temperature on the human body. And basically, they did this after they were in a warm bath or whether they were exercising. So this is actually very similar to what we just recommended with the contrast showers. What they showed is that cold right at the end actually stimulated the very cells that we would like to see stimulated in these types of infections. Let me quote from the paper itself. They said, this study suggests that despite popular beliefs that cold exposure can precipitate a viral infection, the innate component of the immune system is not adversely affected by a brief period of cold exposure. Indeed, the opposite seems to be the case. The fall in core body temperature resulting from cold exposure led to a consistent and statistically significant mobilization of circulating cells, an increase in natural killer cell activity, and elevations in circulating IL-6 concentrations. So there you have it. It's a myth to say that cold exposure necessarily is going to give you a cold. There actually may be some benefit to that. All right, let's change gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about things that maybe, middle-aged and older people might be interested in. I've got some teenagers. They're in school. Maybe we have some young people watching. They've got tests to do. How many of you have done this before? You got a test the next day. You really haven't done your job in terms of studying. And you're like, I'm going to pull an all-nighter. Yep, I'm going to stay up all night. Or let's just say you're driving somewhere. And you know what? I got to get there the next day. We're not stopping at the motel. We're going to go all the way through the night, and we're going to just drive all the way. What does that do? What does that do just for one night to your body in terms of your health? Let's take a look here. So here's a study that was published, an article back in 2018. Study reveals why all-nighters may be so dangerous for your health. Remember, this is not on a repeated basis. This is just doing it for one night. So they took 6 healthy men in their 20s, and they stayed at a research center. They didn't have any access to cell phones or screens, and they slept for 2 nights at baseline. They transitioned to staying awake at night and sleeping during the day, as well as eating during the night. So they did basically everything. They stayed up at night, and they took a blood sample every 4 hours, and they checked them for just about every single protein they could. What did they find? Now, all of those proteins, remember, just about all of those proteins are very specifically regulated. Like it's like a symphony. Imagine a conductor conducting Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, right? You know the one. It starts off with da 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 da, right? You know that one, right? Okay, so there's probably 100 people in the orchestra, and then all those people are ready to go. They are looking at the conductor. Everybody's ready to go, and he says, "Here we go," and the music starts. That's exactly what's happening in the body. The conductor, though, is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and the score sheet is the circadian rhythm, and all the players in the orchestra are the cells in your body that are secreting the proteins at just the right time that we have no idea about. Well, here they looked at all of the scores on actually 1,129 different proteins. What happened after just staying up for one night? About 10% of the proteins completely switched their peak time. And many of these changes appeared by the second day. So what does that tell you? That just after one night of an all-nighter, there is dysregulation. We are going from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony to some modern symphony that we've never heard before at the orchestration center here, right? We've gone from Beethoven to Mahler. I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit maybe too critical there of Mahler. But which proteins, folks? This is not light here, right? Glucagon. That's a major protein that regulates glucose. That rose higher at night than would normally be in the daytime, and that's a risk for diabetes. What about FGF19? This is a calorie boosting burning protein. So in other words, this protein tells your body to burn fat and to make calories. Who would like that? Who would like to see more of that? Well, what happened was when you slept in the day and was awake at night, this protein decreased. So now you're not burning as many calories. You're going to be putting on a little bit of spare tires there in the middle. And that is a risk for weight gain. So this is just after one night. Already we're starting to see changes. This is what the authors of the study said. They said the studies showed that staying awake at night and sleeping during the day for even one 24-hour period can rapidly lead to changes in more than 100 proteins in the blood, including ones that have an effect on blood sugar, immune function, and metabolism. Over time, these biochemical changes in blood protein levels can elevate your risk for heart issue or for health issues like diabetes, weight gain, and even cancer. This was Christopher Depner. He's a PhD postdoc fellow in the Department of Integrative Physiology at the University of Colorado in Boulder. So one night. So a myth would be, you know what? Got a test tomorrow. Can't afford to do bad on this test. Let's go ahead and do it. So we haven't even gotten into the whole point about what do you think these proteins do when you're trying to take a test? Like, are you really that much better off doing an all-nighter before a test, or would it be better for you to prepare earlier and get those things into long-term memory and then sit down and take the test after a good night's rest, right? Sounds like a Uncle Arthur's bedtime story that I used to read when I was little, right? Preparing, or maybe that story about the hare and the rabbit. All right, we are getting into some really good myths now. Here's one. This is one of my favorite myths, okay? High intensity exercise is better than moderate intensity exercise. So this is one that I love because, look, I'm a doc, right? I'm a doctor. I like to tell people a lot of things about what to do, what's good for them. But I'll confess, for a long time, the motto that I used to live by was no pain. Hey, no pain. That's great. No pain, no pain. I can live with that. No, it's no pain, no gain. So here we have this thing in our lives, and when we look on TV and we see people and we read books and magazines, that when they say exercise, what's the first thing that comes into your mind? The first thing that comes into your mind when I say exercise is, you can imagine, I imagine like a whole bunch of really fit people on these stationary bicycles revving up, and they look like they're in the prime of their life. And you're like, there's no way I can do that. There's no way I'm even going to go there. I start to see people running marathons, and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to do that. I'm not going to even bother starting. That is completely a myth. That is completely a myth. What I'm going to show you today is going to blow your mind when it comes to this. When actuality, it's not a line that goes straight up, like the more you do, the better. It's actually a J curve. So let me show you this J curve. This J curve is really important to understand. Here we looked at people who were sedentary, and we saw how often did they get upper respiratory tract infections. So sedentary is right here at normal. As soon as people got off the couch and started to walk and started to garden and started to do some very low level stuff, what happened? There was an immediate response to a reduction in upper respiratory tract infections. And by the way, folks, this transitions to not just upper respiratory tract infections, but basically inflammation in general. However, there came a point when they did more and more and more and more. And what started to happen? Inflammation goes up. Upper respiratory tract infections go up. And so the point is that what the media and the marketing people for gyms love to do is to say, no, if you want to exercise, you need to come down to our gym that has LED lights and fluorescent lights and is indoors with low E glass, and you need to exercise. Do you see what I'm saying here, folks? As opposed to just walking out your door, you don't need a gym membership for that, getting fresh air, getting sunlight, and doing a moderate amount of useful exercise in your garden. That's going to be far more health beneficial than getting a membership to a gym where you're working inside, not getting the benefits of sunlight, not getting the benefits of fresh air, and you're actually overdoing it. Do you understand what I'm saying? We are starting to learn more and more and more that the amount of exercise that is necessary to get good health benefits is far less than we thought. Okay? And so what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to encourage you, for those people that are not doing daily exercise, it is more important to start to do something, even if it's a small thing. That's going to be far more beneficial than to think in your mind that you've got to do a half marathon to get the same benefits that everyone else is getting. So that is a myth. And we could talk a lot more about that with a lot more information. Here is one study that I used to do this. I love this study. I love this study. This is done by a Professor Jennifer Heiss. She's out of McMaster University in Ontario, Canada, and she wanted to look at stress and depression and what exercise would do. So here's the study that she did. Check this out. This is really, really fun. In the last 6 weeks of the course at her school at McMaster, students undergo a tremendous amount of stress. I mean, they've got final exams coming up. This is what their careers are based on. They're under a tremendous amount of stress. So she randomized them all into 3 groups. Those that did no exercise, those that did a moderate amount of exercise, and those that did a lot of exercise. And I've shown that there with no exercise group in gray, moderate exercise group in blue, and high intensity training group in red. Now, how moderate was moderate and how high was high? So this was 6 weeks. They only did it for about 3 times a week, both the high and the moderate. And notice it was only for about 20 minutes. Okay, so it was the same time commitment, but notice that the moderate intensity group only got their heart rates up to about 142. So that would mean for you guys, these are young college students at 142. So for you, so if you were, for every year that you're older than 20 years old, just take that number and subtract it from 142. Let me give an example. If you're 50 years old, okay, that's 30 years older than these people. So take 142 and subtract 30 from it. So you'd be at 112. So for you, moderate would be 112. Okay. High intensity would be 144. Okay. Because that's 174 minus 30, because that's how many years older 50 is than 20. In other words, the higher your age goes, the lower your expected heart rate should be. So if you're 30 years more than 20 years of age, then your heart rate should be 30 below that. Okay. Just to give you an idea about how intense we're talking. So if you're 50 years old, the moderate intensity would be getting your heart rate up to 112 for about 20 minutes, 3 times a week. That's what we're talking about. If you want to talk about high intensity training, that would be like getting your heart rate up to 144 for 20 minutes, 3 times a week. Okay. So what she decided to do was she wanted to check out what happened to their depression scores, what happened to their anxiety scores, what happened to their inflammation, what happened to them, essentially. Hold on to your seats, because this is what happened. When in terms of depression, notice that the people that did nothing had a tremendous increase in their depression scores. And these are validated scores. Okay, so doing nothing when you are under stress is going to cause depression. Notice that not only did the moderate intensity exercise group not get depressed, they actually got less depressed as time went towards final exams. This is the importance of moderate intensity exercise. Also notice that that the high intensity also got a benefit in terms of depression. But notice that as we go on to anxiety and perceived stress, that the high intensity groups did not reap the same benefits as the moderate intensity. And again, this is because of what we talked about with the J curve. Higher intensity, not as good as lower intensity. All right. And then finally, when we looked at tumor necrosis factor alpha, IL-6, these are cytokines that are circulating around the body that signify inflammation. Notice, moderate intensity group had the best scores. So what's the moral of the story here? Is more better when it comes to exercise? No, it's not. Moderate intensity exercise is actually the best in terms of health. How many people have heard, oh, did you hear about that athlete that got COVID and he died and he runs marathons? As if to say, what hope is there for me? Folks, high intensity exercise is not actually a good thing when you're talking about inflammation and good health. There is a J curve, such to so we could talk about this for another hour if you want. There are whole protocols that Olympic athletes go through because of this issue. Olympic athletes are actually under more stress than we are. Their whole careers depend on the next 10 seconds of their 100-meter dash. especially since the Olympics come every 4 years and they may not ever be in Olympics again. So they're under more stress, more physical stress, more mental stress. And because of that, they are more likely than we are to actually come down with these types of illnesses. So that is a myth that I love to dispel. So folks, we are almost here at the end. In fact, I think we are at the end here. And I think we've done a good job at dispelling some of these myths. One of the things that I love to do when I dispel these things is just don't take my word for it. I like to bring evidence and research and show you these things so you can read up on them yourself and not do anything because somebody tells you that that's what the right thing is to do, but to show you through the evidence that that is the right thing to do. So as we go on True Health Tuesdays, we are going to be, this is kind of like a survey of different things. We're trying to show you that there's a need for this, that True Health Tuesdays is going to fill a need, a very, very important need. And as we go forward now, we're going to start to zoom in, and this is kind of the 30,000 foot level. We're going to start to zoom in on the trees, and we're going to pick topics that are important, whether it be sleep apnea, whether it be diet, whether it be exercise, whether it be air, water, these sorts of things. We're going to be focusing on these things, bringing the data to bear, and showing you clear and practical things that you can do and you can share with others to improve their health right there in your living room. So with that, Charles, I'll be open for any questions.
Dr. Schwelt, that was an amazing presentation. I'm just looking at the chat here. So many positive comments. People are learning, particularly the tip that you mentioned about how you can fast before taking conventional treatment for cancer. What a benefit to know that kind of information. Thank you so much for sharing this. There are several questions that I'll get to in just a moment. I do want you all to know that you can follow Dr. Schwelt everywhere on social media at MedCram. Take a look at his website, medcram.com, as well, especially those of you who are in the medical field or those of you who are considering getting into it or students perhaps today. Definitely take a look at that, as so many people have benefited from his content in the past. You know, I have a few questions, Dr. Schwelt. And the first one I'll go to was from Michelle, who asks, does exercise help with those with osteoarthritis? It's a concern that people have sometimes, that maybe if they have osteoarthritis, they should take it easy or maybe not even exercise at all. What do you, oh, and let me just say this as before you answer. Obviously, folks, Dr. Schwelt is not your doctor. And so as we go through these questions, you know, he's just going through the questions, answering the questions from a generic standpoint. If you have a personal issue that you're dealing with, you should take a look in and converse with your personal physician. So Dr. Schwelt, those with osteoarthritis, should they exercise? Should they be concerned about how much?
Excellent point. So it kind of depends on where the osteoarthritis is and how it impedes. Let me give some examples. Let's say you have osteoarthritis of your knee, which is a very common area to have it. And it's very painful to put weight on that knee. And as a result of that, you do less walking. And as a result of that, you gain weight. And what does that do? That puts more weight on the knee. So you're losing out on the benefits of exercise. There are some creative things that you can do that still get the benefit of exercise without putting a lot of damage or pain on that. So for instance, there is, it does require a little bit of expense, but you can get a stationary bicycle. The stationary bicycle allows you to do exercise without putting a strain on that joint. The other thing that is sometimes available for people, depending on where they live, is swimming. So here's where you're swimming. You're really taking all of the weight off of all of your joints, but you're still able to physically exercise and get that cardiovascular benefits for that. And then the last thing I would say is, and there's actually been some really good data on this, is that sauna use. So going into a hot sauna, and I don't recommend that for everybody. You have to check with your doctor because sometimes there are some consequences to that, especially cardiovascular, but there are cardiovascular benefits too. But going into a sauna for 20 minutes at an extended period of time with heat can actually be a surrogate of exercise. So in other words, it causes your heart to speed up. It causes all the things that your body would normally go under in terms of exercise, but you're not putting stress on those joints. Interestingly, going back to the osteoarthritis part, is that exercise actually strengthens the bones too. So if you don't have arthritis, don't feel like exercising is going to get you arthritis. It actually may help prevent that. So that's hopefully a way to get around that. If you've got pain in the joints, you can sometimes circumvent that by doing other things to get the benefit for exercise.
Awesome. Joanne asks, can night shift workers ever get their sleep rhythm back? So, Dr. Schweld, I'm sure you've dealt with this with your patients that for years, they're just doing shift work year after year or months after month and for a long period of time. And Joanne is asking, hey, is there any hope for a person who has that background?
Yeah, so the thing that you should understand is that circadian rhythm doesn't change very rapidly. You can't be sleeping in the night one day and then decide to sleep in the day the next day. So what I would recommend, first of all, for any night shift worker, especially those that do the 7 to 7, is you really have to switch your AMs and your PMs. So in other words, whatever a normal person would do at a specific hour, you do that at the flip of it. So what I mean by that practically is that you're getting up in the morning at about 5 p.m. That's your morning. Hopefully your bedroom is completely sealed off. There's no light coming in. You get up, you go into work for the day at 7 p.m. You work at night. The light should be bright. It should be as if it were day to you. And then when you're getting home at 6 or 7 in the morning, that's now evening time. What you need to do is you need to go into your bedroom and go to sleep and make sure that it's dark so that the sun is not coming in. So in other words, you need to completely flip it around. And here's the key important part is you need to do it on days even when you're not working, because that's how you get your circadian rhythm in train, even on the weekends when you're not working. That you just basically need to be a night owl. You will get all the benefits of the circadian rhythm, all the benefits of melatonin if you do that. Now, let's say you get the good news and you get to switch to the day shift. It shouldn't take very long, but it'll take maybe about a week or so. But your circadian rhythm will shift once you go to the day shift. It will eventually shift back. It'll probably just get longer and longer. And you'll, just like when we get on a plane and fly to the other side of the planet, eventually we adjust after a couple of weeks. So the answer specifically to your question is, will you get your circadian rhythm back? Absolutely. But it's important to maintain the circadian rhythm depending on what area you're in. Now, this question becomes very complicated in those people who unfortunately have different shifts. So maybe one day of the week, they're working a day shift. The next day, they're working a night shift. Maybe they go to a split shift. That's really difficult. It would almost be better to be night shift and stay night shift and then rotate back. This is a very common problem, Charles, and something that we have to deal with. Most nurses who come out of nursing school will get jobs. Almost all of those jobs will be night shift, and it's usually happening when they're very young, when they're young, have young families, and there has been some data that night shift workers have an association with an increased risk for cancer, and it probably is because they're not doing these sorts of things that they need to be doing.
Wow, a tough situation there, but it's good to hear that there are some things that we can do to adjust for that.
Yep.
Gigi asks, can you get vitamin D from tanning booths?
It depends on if the tanning booths are giving you ultraviolet B. So there is visible spectrum will not give you vitamin D. Ultraviolet A will not give you vitamin D. Ultraviolet C will not give you vitamin D. Only ultraviolet B will give you vitamin D. So it depends on what is going on there. I would say that there's probably better ways of getting vitamin D than a tanning booth.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I thought it was a fun question to delve into anyway. All right. Here's one about senior citizens and sunlight, and it's from Deborah. And she asks, how effective is the sunlight on senior citizens? Do they need as much sunlight?
As it turns out, when we're talking about vitamin D, they actually need more sunlight because as you get older, the systems deep in your skin are not as efficient in turning the sunlight into vitamin D. So, to that degree, if you are depending in any way to get your vitamin D from the sunlight, the answer is yes, you need more exposure. And really, for vitamin D, you do need actual direct exposure of the sun on your skin. And that's because ultraviolet light is very easily blocked by sunscreen, by clothes, by even paper. That can block the very weak ultraviolet B radiation. Now, that is as opposed to infrared radiation. Infrared radiation that we said can penetrate deep down into the body and stimulate the mitochondria. That can go through clothes. That can go through, layers of skin. Obviously, it can even penetrate. People have shown bone. So, in other words, sunlight can penetrate your hat. The infrared go through your skull and actually illuminate the gray matter of your brain. Interestingly, and there's been a lot of studies that we won't get into about how being outdoors actually increases gray matter and increases the volume of the brain. Very interesting research in that respect in terms of multiple sclerosis, which we know has a higher predilection at higher latitudes. But yeah, as you get older, you may actually need more sunlight.
Wow. Definitely, probably another one of those health myths. A lot of times when it comes to the elderly class, we just assume, hey, we just keep them indoors and make sure no one bothers them. And that's a direct opposite of what we should be doing a lot of times.
It's interesting you said that because I just got a call from a nursing home medical director about some COVID cases in their nursing home and how to deal with that. And I told them, you need to get them outside. You need to get them outside in the sunlight, in the fresh air. You're absolutely right. We have this tendency to put them in the room and to let them be in the room. They've got a window that they look through, but getting outside into the sunshine, fresh air, that is the best thing that we can do.
Yeah. And just in case some of you may not know this, Dr. Sweld is a sleep specialist, and also in recent years, lots of established leaders in the medical field have sought his expertise out as it relates to COVID as well. And so that's the reason why he's getting questions like that. There's an adjacent question that I just ran across around sleep from Janelle, and it says, are day naps helpful or do they negatively affect your night sleep?
Very good question. So there's a substance in the body called adenosine. And when you get up in the morning, your adenosine levels are very low. And as you start to go throughout the day, adenosine levels start to rise. And why that's helpful is toward the end of the day, adenosine levels are actually the drive for you to fall asleep. So the question is whether or not you should take naps. Just realize that if you take a nap during the day, that's going to reduce your adenosine levels while you're napping. And then when you wake up again, you're going to have to build those up again. So for people who have no problem falling asleep at night, I have no problem with anybody taking a nap. However, if somebody comes to me and they have difficulty falling asleep or insomnia, then I will tell them that they should probably avoid napping during the day so that we can have the highest amounts of adenosine possible to try to get them to sleep at night.
Got it. Okay. A couple of questions. We've got a handful of questions left here. And one that I want to get to is from Michelle, and she asks, you talk so much about fasting. You made some powerful points there about fasting. And she's asking, are there any tips for making it easier? And if I recall, there were several people in the chat who could attest to the benefits of fasting that you were mentioning, that they saw some weight loss or felt better, but it's challenging to do, they were saying. Have you seen any, either in the research or just with the experiences of people, there's certain things you can do to make fasting easier?
Very good question. So what I would recommend doing is realizing that it's kind of like hitting the sound barrier. For those who don't know, as a plane increases in speed towards the speed of sound, the resistance to speed increases so that it's harder and harder. But once you pierce that sound barrier, that resistance goes away. And so a lot of the problems that people have with fasting is the fact that their bodies have been programmed to eat, and therefore they will feel hungry. And that takes a few weeks for it to go through. So the first thing you should understand is that the problems that you're having with fasting, unless of course it's hypoglycemia and passing out, that's a completely different thing. But if the problems that you're having is one of hunger, a feeling, a sensation of hunger and things of that nature, those are things that are temporary and will eventually go away once your body gets adjusted to the new schedule. Some things, though, that can help that is water. Water intake is a great way of giving your stomach the feeling that there is something in there, but without calories. And when I say calories, it's specifically calories from sugar. That's that's really the prime issue with fasting. So if, in other words, if you needed to break a fast because you were not, because you're feeling bad, but you don't want to have the full out detriment of breaking that fast, I would fast with something that's high in protein or high in lipids and very, very low in sugar. That's what I would recommend.
Well, isn't that related to the fasting mimicking diet?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
That's
So
exactly right.
you can sort of fast without completely eradicating food, or at least get a lot of the benefits from fasting.
Exactly. And I would say that if you're going to drink water, put some lemon in there. That it gives it some taste. It really helps the body in terms of feeling that you're getting something in your stomach, you're tasting something, and it kind of puts your mind at ease, fills up the stomach, but you haven't broken your fast in any way.
You know, that helps me when I fast. I'll put in some lemon. Something else that I've noticed is trace minerals for some
Yeah.
reason help me out too. Probably because you're washing away so many of those minerals as you're going through a fast, especially after a couple of days or so.
Right.
All right. Another question. Oh, we've got people watching from work, Dr. Swelt. And Andy, take care, and hopefully your supervisor realizes that this is for the benefit of your boss as well. So
That's right.
uh, we've got a question from Marie, who says, "Should we use sunscreen?" This is a common question. What do you say?
Yeah. So you have to realize that there are some people out there that, for whatever reason, have sensitivities to the sun. Some people will break out in a rash. Some people have had a history of melanoma. And so we can't group all of this together in one thing. What I would say, though, is this, is that for the benefit of getting near infrared radiation into your skin, into the mitochondria, sunscreen has no effect, which is good. So if you have to use sunscreen, don't feel like it's going to block the benefits of near infrared radiation. If you want to test this out on yourself, go outside on a bright and sunny day, put some sunscreen on your back and put your back to the sun and tell me if you can't feel the heat. You'll still feel the heat. That's near infrared penetrating right through that sunscreen. There is a belief, though, and I'm not going to say that it's true or not true. I just haven't really researched it. I'm not a dermatologist, and I'm not pretending to be one, that there are some concerns that sunscreen may have chemicals in it that may absorb in the body and cause issues. That may or may not be the case. All I can speak to is that sunscreen does help prevent burning, especially if there's high amounts of ultraviolet radiation. Look, if you go up to very high altitude, there's not a lot of atmosphere up there. Those ultraviolet rays will come down with pretty intensity. If anyone's ever gone skiing and wasn't wearing a face mask for the day, you'll see that your face gets pretty burned. So you're wearing sunscreen in that type of a situation, or at least covering up in that type of a situation, may actually be a good thing. But realize that sunscreen eliminates ultraviolet radiation, and that's beneficial in some respects to getting vitamin D, especially if you're not supplementing. So you got to get your vitamin D some way.
All right, very good. A quick question from me, Dr. Schwell. We've just got another three or so questions to go. And that is the study you referenced dealing with the foods being concentrated, food intake being concentrated towards the beginning of the day, circadian clock genes you were talking about, BDNF.
Yeah.
Did they account for the number of calories? In other words, did it matter did they need to adjust the number of calories in order to get the benefit from eating earlier in the day versus later?
Yeah, good question. I was trying to go back to that slide to pull it up because I believe it actually had on there exactly how many calories there were. Let me see if I can bring that up.
This was a fascinating study here.
Yeah, and by the way, they did another study in China. I was confusing that with a Chinese study that they did in China. They put this to diabetics, and they noticed a 20% reduction in hemoglobin A1C when they did this very same thing. Notice here, yeah, it's exactly the same calories. So breakfast was 33. I don't know if I can read that or not. Lunch about the same calories, and dinner same calories. So same calories in both of these situations. And by the way, they were, this is a randomized controlled trial, but even more importantly, it was a crossover trial. So in other words, after they were done with all of this, everybody that was in the control arm became the intervention arm. Everybody in the intervention arm became the control arm. And so it eliminates a lot of bias and a lot of confounders when you do that kind of a study. So very elegant study.
Wow, powerful. And it really helps you to see that it doesn't matter even the number of calories, just ending your eating window earlier in the day
Yeah.
is going to improve really markers for longevity, is what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and this was a very short study. It wasn't long. So imagine doing this for a year or 2 years.
Right. Wow.
And we know we've got all sorts of data, unfortunately, in mice and rats. We know that rats that are overfed die early. Rats that go through stress seem to do better in terms of that. There's an interesting concept in a lot of this longevity trial stuff, that when you expose the body to extremes, it causes the body and tells the body to make proteins in a way, or to make more proteins in a way that are survival. Just to give you a quick example, exposing yourself to hot and cold causes the production of heat shock proteins and all sorts of things. Exposing your body to no calories for a certain period of time causes your body to break down bad things and build it up better. So every once in a while, exposing yourself to these extremes kind of stimulates and challenges the body to be able to deal with things in a way that seems to be better, and increases longevity.
Wow. Well, that sounds like amazing design to me, that the human body can be trained to be a little more resilient.
Yeah, the term that they use there is hormesis. It's this idea that stressing the body in the short run tends to have better results in the long run. And we have spiritual and practical applications, all of that in the human body anyway, that it makes sense that we would see this happening here too.
Wow. Well, the last question I've got here is that we have an autistic person in the audience, Dr. Sweld, and they wanted to know if you could elaborate more on a statement you made about the mitochondria in autism. Do you recall that?
Yeah, so basically, a lot of whether it's Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, a number of dementia types of things, and also in autism, where we have learning disabilities. Scientists today, and I'm not an expert in that field, but I've read the papers, and they are saying that even autism itself is related in some ways to mitochondrial dysfunction. So this is where the mitochondria are not working very well. To get a little bit more specific, when these byproducts of metabolism in the mitochondria are created, these are what we call oxygen radicals. They have one electron that is extremely reactive, and because of that, these things, because they're produced in the mitochondria, they only have to travel a few angstroms, if you will, a molecule, and it will bump into proteins in the mitochondria and destroy them. And so you can see that these are very toxic chemicals that are being created in a very sensitive place. And so you need to have a solution produced on site to mop these things up. And that's exactly what melatonin is. It's an extremely powerful antioxidant that mops up these oxidative stress molecules and prevents the mitochondrial dysfunction that we're seeing. So all I can say based on the data is that there is a connection between mitochondrial dysfunction and dementia, Alzheimer's, autism. And we know that this type of damage can happen when there's too much oxidative stress.
Excellent. Well, folks, that was the first of many True Health Tuesdays. Why don't you put blessed in the comments if you enjoyed what Dr. Schwelt was able to provide to us today? And I think we're going to get a bless from everybody, Dr. Schwelt, except for my man, Gustav Mahler, who you decided was on the bad end of the spectrum.
Well,
As
maybe I kind of did that a little bit heavy-handed. I'm a Baroque Bach guy, if you must know. So
I understand. I can't be upset with you on that. But certainly Gustav wasn't too shabby.
he
But
was
we
not.
understood the point. And the fact is that there's so much that we can do in the human body that we have control over, folks. And that's what we're trying to do in True Health Tuesdays and really across the different pillars in Living Manna Church. So we hope that you were blessed. Let me just read this comment from Patrice very quickly. She wants to ask about trampoline for exercise. So, but I just want to sneak her question in real quick, Dr. Swell. What do you think about trampoline for exercise? And then we'll close.
I think any way that you're going to, if that's what's going to get you out there to exercise, I think that's a good thing. I have a friend who is a emergency room physician, and he says, Roger, you would not believe how many injuries I have coming into the emergency room from trampolines.
Oh, wow.
So he told me that, and as a result of that, I did not buy my kids a trampoline, but he bought his kids a trampoline. So I don't know what to think about that. I guess buyer beware.
Yeah, just get moving one way or another.
Yeah.
Well, folks, next week we'll have my wife, Dr. Kenesha Reynolds, and in the future we'll have both Dr. Kenesha and Dr. Roger Swelt come on, and that'll be a powerful combination as well. If you have any more questions, or if there's questions that you asked in the comments that were not answered, just keep putting them in the comments in this video, and we'll get to them in the future, because I'm going to take all of those questions, and in the future we're going to do just a straight Q&A. So these two doctors can just give you what they're thinking and answers to your questions. Okay. Well, we thank you so much for joining today. And until next week, live life in true health. Bye, everyone.